In the book, we cover essentially the three basic areas that are related to criminal profiling. First is the area of forensic analysis, understanding what the physical evidence is, understanding what it's not, what's there, what's not there, and what that means in terms of offense behavior. What behaviors did the offender commit, what behaviors did the victim commit, and what X factors might be present in the crime scene itself that might have limited what behavior you see. So from the reconstruction of the crime and the physical evidence, you get the behavior. So we now know what happened, what took place, who did what where. All right? But the next thing is you got to understand the victimology, the background and history of the victim, their lifestyle exposure, their incident exposure, what things caused them to interact with that particular offender at that particular time, and what in their background led to that moment, if anything. And all what that does is it defines the suspect pool. You get that friends and family list, you get the list of coworkers and employers. You're trying to do a deep background on each victim so you know who they are and how they arrived at that moment in time to be acquired by a particular offender, and because of that, who the suspects have to be. All right, that victimology gives you that victim suspect pool. Then the crime scene analysis occurs, where you're synthesizing the information from the behavior of the evidence, from the victimology, to help understand what the offender's actual modus operandi are. What choices did the offender actually make? How'd they get into the scene? How'd they get out? What they take with them? What they leave behind? What were the methods of attack and approach? Methods of killing, if any killing was involved? What the nature and sequence of any sexual acts? So this crime scene analysis component, that's breaking down or categorizing and classifying the information that you've been gathering in the first two stages. The final stage, if necessary, is the profiling stage, where you're actually rendering the characteristics of the offender, the amount of skill that was involved, what kind of skill that was, whether or not they have any specific motive that's involved in any specific fantasy behavior that might suggest any particular fantasy motive, any sort of empathy or lack of empathy or knowledge of the victim that they are demonstrating, some sort of knowledge of the scene that they are demonstrating. Is it a scene that everybody can get to, or that it's very isolated and nobody knows about except for one person? Is there a lock on it that only one person has a key to, or is it everybody has a key? It's those kinds of questions that you're narrowing it down. So what you're doing is you're using physical evidence, victimology, and crime scene analysis to render a profile that tells you something about, that narrows down that suspect pool from that universal set of everybody to a smaller, more manageable group of people, so you can focus your investigative efforts. A profile shouldn't necessarily be used to say that somebody committed a crime, but it's used to say he's in that group of people. And we need to now focus our investigative efforts on this group of people or on this person and eliminate them. You never go after a suspect thinking you're going to go include him. You say, how do we get rid of him? And it's when you fail to get rid of him, that's when you know you got a good suspect. It's an irony that many times criminal profilers are brought in because there has been poor investigative effort. They're brought in because there's the belief that they can solve the case or help solve the case despite the fact that things have not been done. And the reality is that what I do, and this is the very first chapters of the textbook, requires that you go back and look at the physical evidence and say, here's what's been done with it, here's what hasn't been done with it, here's what still can be done with it, to tell us what the behavior is. Because if you don't know what behavior happened in the crime scene, you don't have anything to profile. Other people, other different profiling methods based on experience or based on statistics, they will generate a probabilistic guess as to what they think happened, a prediction of what they think may have happened, or what they think the offender might be like. It is not a concrete examination. It is an abstract based on averages. And that to me is extremely dangerous. It's how you get the lone white male with problems with his mother. That's where that comes from. And it is invariably wrong because the studies that are done are poorly done. They're not based on real data. They're based often on newspaper articles, or they focus primarily on white populations of offenders because that's what's reported in the news. They don't take into account the nature and variety of actual real serial crime that occurs. So for me, I tend to stay away from those studies because they're not done very scientifically, or what's produced with them is not necessarily relevant to the case that I have. Because the case that I have in front of me, the unsolved case, is going to have its own specific limitations, its own specific types of evidence. And it's a real case with a real concrete offender that doesn't exist in the abstract. I want to really know who the offender is, not guess what the offender might be like based on similar past cases. Criminal profiling is an ideal textbook for students who have never encountered the subject of criminal profiling before, who want to understand how it works, the areas of study they need to become better at, and the disciplines that they might want to seek out for internships. It's also vital for criminal investigators to understand how to investigate and organize their case so that they can understand the suspects that they have right in front of them. But more than any of that, it also organizes your case so when you finally put together a package to go to trial, you're that much more organized, you're that much more prepared, and you've plugged that many more holes to eliminate that many more suspects, because the mindset of suspect elimination is always forefront. So it helps investigators, it helps students, but also if you're an instructor at a university and you want to use a book that's ideal for teaching criminal profiling, this is really the way to go, because all the materials are there for you and it walks you step by step through the process. You can explore the subject with your student even if it's your first time. And that, to me, is probably the single most exciting feature of the book, is that it makes for better student-teacher interactions. It's heavy on method, it's heavy on science, but it's also heavy on casework and application.